Joshua stood at the threshold of a new beginning. The desert, which for so many years had been the backdrop of trials, now lay behind. Moses, the great leader, was gone, and upon Joshua rested the weight of leading an entire people. The Jordan River, which seemed impossible to cross, was the next obstacle. Joshua gathered the officers and gave clear instructions. In 3 days, the people were to be ready to cross the river. It was time to leave the past behind and move toward the future. Joshua walked among the tents, watching families prepare, curious children, elders in prayer. The river was full, its waters overflowing because of the harvest season. Joshua looked at the priests and gave the signal. They advanced, carrying the ark. When their feet touched the water, something extraordinary happened. The river stopped flowing. The waters piled up upstream, forming an invisible wall, and the riverbed became dry. The people crossed safely. Every tribe, every family, every child. He knew that every step from that point forward would require courage. These stones would be a memorial, a reminder for future generations of what God had done there. When everyone had finished crossing, the priests left the riverbed, and the waters returned to their course as before. He was the chosen successor, appointed to guide Israel into the promised land. Joshua set up the 12 stones, and there he told the people about God's faithfulness. They ate the fruit of the land for the first time, for the manna ceased. It was the start of a new life, marked by faith and courage. Joshua, now leader, looked at the land before him with hope. He knew that every step would be guided by God, and that the promise made to Abraham, Isaac, Joseph, and Moses was about to be fulfilled. It was a new beginning, a new stage in Israel's story. The fear of Jericho grew, for the city's inhabitants had heard about the miracle at the Jordan. Joshua knew that greater challenges would come, but he also knew he was not alone. It was no simple task. Joshua felt the burden of responsibility, but also a quiet confidence. He remembered Moses' words, the promises made by God, and knew he was not alone. Episode 1: The Calling and the Crossing. The Israelite camp buzzed with the news. That night, Joshua sought the presence of God. In silence, he asked for guidance, for strength. God spoke to him, saying that just as he had been with Moses, he would also be with Joshua. He should not fear or be discouraged, for the Lord would be with him in every battle, in every decision. He instructed the people to consecrate themselves, for the next day God would do wonders among them. The priests were ordered to carry the Ark of the Covenant ahead of the people. The Ark represented the presence of God, and no one should approach it except the priests. Joshua rose with a renewed heart. The next day, Joshua sent 2 spies to Jericho. They were to observe the city and bring back information. The two men left discreetly and, upon arriving in the city, found shelter in the house of Rahab, a woman who lived in the city wall. Rahab hid them, for she knew the God of Israel was powerful. She asked only that, when Israel conquered Jericho, her family would be spared. The spies promised, and she helped them escape through the window, using a red cord as a sign. While the spies returned, Joshua prepared for the great moment. The sun rose, and the people gathered before the Jordan. Joshua ordered 12 men, one from each tribe, to take a stone from the middle of the river. That night, the people celebrated. Episode 2: Jericho and the Promise Fulfilled. The Israelite camp at Gilgal was filled with anticipation. After crossing the Jordan, the people stood before the imposing city of Jericho, its walls high and gates tightly shut. Their mission was to observe the city and report back. They reported that the people of Jericho were faint-hearted and that God had surely given the land into Israel's hands. The Israelites were to march around the city once a day for 6 days, led by 7 priests carrying trumpets of ram's horns before the Ark of the Covenant. On the 7th day, they were to march around the city 7 times. Only Rahab and her family were spared, as agreed. The spies rescued her and her relatives, bringing them safely out of the city. Rahab and her family were welcomed into the community of Israel, a testament to God's mercy for those who put their faith in Him, regardless of their past. At Joshua's command, the priests would blow their trumpets, and all the people would shout loudly. The fame of Joshua spread throughout the land, and the people of Israel celebrated their first great victory in Canaan. It showed that victory comes from trusting God's word and acting in obedience, even when the strategy seems unusual. The mercy shown to Rahab revealed that God's grace extends to all who believe, no matter where they come from. Joshua and the Israelites learned that the journey ahead would require faith, unity, and unwavering trust in the Lord's guidance. The story of Jericho became a symbol of faith, obedience, and the fulfillment of God's promises. Then, God promised the walls of Jericho would collapse and the city would be theirs. Joshua, encouraged by this news, prepared the people for the next step. Rahab hid them from the king's men, risking her own life. She confessed her faith in the God of Israel, saying that all the people of Jericho were terrified because they had heard of the miracles God had performed for Israel. In return for her protection, the spies promised that Rahab and her family would be spared when the city fell. As long as she marked her house with a red cord in the window. Joshua, now the leader, knew this would be the first major challenge in the promised land. he was determined to act with wisdom and faith, remembering the lessons from the past. As a first step, Joshua secretly sent 2 spies to Jericho. For 6 days, the Israelites marched around Jericho in silence, except for the sound of the trumpets. The inhabitants of Jericho watched anxiously from behind their fortified walls, unsure of what to expect. On the 7th day, the Israelites rose early and marched around the city 7 times. At the end of the 7th circuit, Joshua gave the signal. The priests blew the trumpets, and the people shouted with all their might. In that moment, the walls of Jericho fell flat, and the Israelites rushed in, taking the city as God had promised. The spies escaped thanks to Rahab's help, hiding in the hills for 3 days before returning to Joshua. God gave Joshua a unique strategy for conquering Jericho. Joshua relayed God's instructions to the people. Joshua ordered that everything in the city be devoted to the Lord. After the victory, Joshua pronounced a curse on anyone who would try to rebuild Jericho, declaring that such a person would pay a heavy price. The conquest of Jericho was not just a military triumph, but a spiritual one. Episode 3: The Conquest of Ai and the Power of Obedience. After the dramatic fall of Jericho, Israel faced a sobering setback at Ai. Their first attempt to conquer the city ended in defeat, a result of disobedience within the camp. But with the issue resolved and the people purified, God once again spoke to Joshua. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. Take all the fighting men with you and go up and attack Ai. I have delivered into your hands the king of Ai, his people, his city, and his land. This time, God provided a new strategy, one that would require patience, discipline, and complete trust in his guidance. The city of Ai was completely destroyed, reduced to ruins and ashes, never to be rebuilt. There, in the presence of the entire nation, including women, children, and foreigners, Joshua read aloud all the words of the law given by Moses. It was a lesson in the consequences of disobedience, the necessity of repentance, and the blessings that follow when a people walk in step with God's will. Joshua's leadership, marked by courage, wisdom, and unwavering trust in the Lord, set the tone for the challenges and victories yet to come. This public reading was a renewal of the covenant, a reminder that Israel's strength did not come from military power, but from faithfulness to God's commands. The victory was total, but it came only after Israel learned the importance of obedience and humility before God. Joshua quickly organized his forces. He chose 30,000 of his best warriors and sent them out at night to set an ambush behind the city. Confident from their previous victory, the men of Ai pursued the Israelites, leaving their city gates wide open. This was the signal for the hidden soldiers to spring into action. The ambush force rushed into the unguarded city, captured it, and set it ablaze. Smoke began to rise, visible to both the fleeing Israelites and the men of Ai. Realizing too late what had happened, the soldiers of Ai found themselves trapped between Joshua's main force and the ambush group emerging from the burning city. Every able man from Ai and nearby Bethel joined the chase, eager to defeat Israel once again. But they had no idea that an ambush awaited them. Another group of 5,000 soldiers was positioned between Bethel and Ai, also ready to strike. The main army, led by Joshua, camped to the north. Across the valley from Ai, the Israelites killed all the defenders, and the king of Ai was captured alive. Joshua ordered him to be executed and his body displayed at the city gate, then buried under a large pile of stones, lasting reminder of the city's fate. The plan was clear. The main force would approach the city and, at the right moment, pretend to flee, drawing out Ai's defenders and leaving the city vulnerable. At dawn, the king of Ai saw Joshua's army and quickly led his troops out to meet them in battle. As the defenders of Ai chased after Joshua's force, God instructed Joshua to raise his spear toward the city. With nowhere to run, Ai's army was surrounded and defeated. Unlike Jericho, where everything was to be destroyed, this time God allowed the Israelites to take livestock and other plunder as their own. After the battle, Joshua led the people to Mount Ebal, where he built an altar to the Lord and offered sacrifices of thanksgiving. The conquest of Ai became a turning point in Israel's journey. Episode 4: The Memorial Stones and a New Identity. After the miraculous crossing of the Jordan River, the people of Israel found themselves standing on the threshold of the Promised Land. The waters had parted. The priests had carried the Ark of the Covenant on dry ground, and every tribe had safely reached the western bank. But before the journey continued, God commanded Joshua to mark this moment for generations to come. Their task was clear: return to the middle of the Jordan, where the priests still stood with the ark, and each man was to lift a stone onto his shoulder. These 12 stones would be carried to the place where the Israelites would camp that night. The stones were not just souvenirs. They were to become a memorial, a visible sign of God's faithfulness and power. The command for remembrance. God spoke to Joshua, instructing him to choose 12 men, one from each tribe. Building the memorial at Gilgal. The camp was set up at Gilgal on the eastern border of Jericho. There, Joshua arranged the 12 stones in a circle, each representing a tribe of Israel. Children traced the rough edges of the stones, imagining the moment their ancestors stepped onto dry land. The story was alive, woven into the identity of a people chosen and led by God. The people were no longer wanderers, but settlers, rooted in the land promised to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Moses. The journey was far from over, but Israel now carried with them a tangible sign of hope, faith, and a renewed identity as God's people. The 12 stones at Gilgal stood as a silent witness to God's faithfulness, reminder that every victory, every step forward was possible because God was with them. As the people watched, Joshua explained the purpose. In the future, when your children ask, "What do these stones mean?" you will tell them how the waters of the Jordan were cut off before the Ark of the Covenant. These stones are to be a memorial to the people of Israel forever. The stones became a teaching tool, a way for parents to pass on the story of God's deliverance to their children. Joshua's leadership affirmed. On that day, as the last of the Israelites crossed and the priests stepped out of the riverbed, the waters of the Jordan returned to their place, flowing as before. The miracle was complete. God used this moment to exalt Joshua in the eyes of all Israel. The people revered him as they had revered Moses, recognizing that God's presence and authority rested on their new leader. It was a call to remember, to pause, and reflect on the journey from slavery in Egypt. It reminded Israel that their story was shaped by God's mighty hand, not by their own strength. The stones were a warning against forgetfulness and a prompt for gratitude, faith, and obedience. The role of the memorial stones. The memorial at Gilgal was more than a pile of rocks, passing the story forward. As families gathered around the memorial, parents recounted the crossing of the Jordan, the fear as the river raged, and the awe as the waters stopped. A new era begins. With the memorial established, Israel was ready for the next chapter. The episode of the memorial stones is a lesson for every generation. Remember what God has done. Teach it to your children and let gratitude shape your future. Episode 5: The Battle for AI and the Cost of Disobedience. After the triumph at Jericho, Israel's next challenge was the city of Ai, a smaller but strategically crucial fortress. Joshua sent spies to scout Ai, and their report was optimistic only. A few men would be needed to take the city. Confident, Joshua sent about 3,000 soldiers, but the attack ended in disaster. The men of Ai struck down 36 Israelites and chased the rest away, leaving the people's hearts melted with fear. Joshua was devastated. He tore his clothes and fell face down before the ark of the Lord, crying out for understanding. God revealed the reason for the defeat. Someone in Israel had violated the command to devote everything in Jericho to destruction. Achan had secretly taken forbidden items for himself, bringing sin into the camp. The victory at Ai was not just a military achievement, but a spiritual lesson. There, in the presence of all Israel men, women, children, and foreigners, Joshua read aloud the words of the law, renewing the covenant with God. The people listened, reminded that their success in the land depended not on their own strength, but on faithfulness to the Lord's commands. It showed that God's presence and blessing depended on Israel's obedience. Through defeat and victory, Israel learned that obedience to God was the foundation for every conquest and every promise fulfilled. Sin in the camp brought defeat and fear. Repentance and faith brought restoration and victory. Joshua and his troops pretended to flee, drawing the defenders away from Ai. As the last of Ai's soldiers left the city, Joshua stretched out his javelin toward Ai, signaling the ambush. Only after Achan's sin was exposed and judged did God promise to be with Israel again. With the people purified, God gave Joshua a new plan for Ai. This time, the Lord commanded Joshua to use the full strength of Israel's army, 30,000 warriors, to set an ambush behind the city. Joshua divided his forces. A main army camped to the north, while a smaller group hid to the west, ready to strike. At dawn, Joshua and his main force approached Ai. The king of Ai, seeing them, led his men out to battle, leaving the city unguarded. The hidden Israelite warriors rushed into the empty city, set it on fire, and smoke rose into the sky. The men of Ai, realizing too late, looked back and saw their city in flames. The city was burned and left in ruins, a permanent reminder of God's judgment. The king of Ai was captured and executed, his body displayed until evening, then buried under a pile of stones at the city gate. Trapped between Joshua's main force and the ambush, they had nowhere to run. Israel turned and attacked from both sides, defeating the army of Ai completely. When the battle ended, 12,000 men and women, the entire population of Ai, had fallen. Unlike Jericho, where everything was to be destroyed, this time God allowed the Israelites to keep the livestock and plunder from Ai as their own. After the conquest, Joshua led the people to Mount Ebal, where he built an altar to the Lord and offered sacrifices. The battle for Ai became a turning point in Israel's journey. It was a story of failure and restoration, of judgment and mercy. Episode 6: The Day the Walls Fell. The Israelites camped near Jericho, their hearts filled with anticipation and awe. The city's gates were tightly shut, no one entering or leaving, as fear of Israel had spread among the people of Canaan. Joshua, following God's command, prepared the people for a battle unlike any they had faced before. The priests blew their trumpets, the ark moved steadily, and the people marched in silence. After circling the city once, they returned to camp and waited for the next day. For 6 days, this ritual was repeated. The inhabitants of Jericho watched from behind their walls, uncertain and afraid, wondering what purpose this strange parade served. The fame of Joshua and the God of Israel spread throughout the land as news of Jericho's miraculous fall traveled far and wide. It was a declaration of God's power and a lesson in the necessity of obedience, even when God's instructions seem unusual. They had witnessed a miracle, a fulfillment of promises made to Abraham, Isaac, and Moses. Joshua's leadership was affirmed, and the covenant with God was strengthened. The fall of Jericho became a symbol for generations, reminder that with faith and obedience, no wall is too high, no obstacle too great, and every promise of God can be trusted. The people learned that faith sometimes means trusting in what cannot be seen or understood. Their silent march, their patience, and their obedience brought down walls that seemed unbreakable. This would not be a victory of swords and strength, but of obedience and faith. Instead of circling the city once, they would march around it 7 times. The tension grew with each circuit, the sound of the trumpets growing more intense. After the 7th lap, Joshua signaled the priests to give a long blast on their horns. At his command, the people let out a mighty shout. God's instructions to Joshua were precise and unusual. The army was to march around the city of Jericho once a day for 6 days. The walls of Jericho collapsed, falling flat to the ground. The Israelites surged forward, entering the city from every side. They destroyed everything as God had commanded, sparing only Rahab and her family, who had sheltered the spies and trusted in the God of Israel. Rahab and her household were brought out safely and welcomed into the community of Israel, a living testimony to faith and redemption. 7 priests would lead the procession, blowing trumpets made from ram's horns, followed by the Ark of the Covenant, the symbol of God's presence among his people. Armed men would go before the priests, and a rear guard would follow behind. The people were to remain completely silent as they marched. No shout, no word. Only the sound of the trumpets echoing against the city walls. Each day, as the sun rose, Joshua led the procession around Jericho. On the 7th day, Joshua gave new instructions. The people were to rise early, for this day would be different. In that instant, the impossible happened. Joshua then declared a curse over Jericho, warning that anyone who tried to rebuild the city would do so at great personal cost. The victory at Jericho was not just a military conquest. As the dust settled, the Israelites stood in the ruins of Jericho, humbled and grateful. Episode 7: The Division of the Land and Caleb's Legacy. After years of battles, the people of Israel finally stood on the soil of the promised land, their hearts filled with gratitude and anticipation. The time for conquest was giving way to a new challenge, dividing Canaan among the 12 tribes. Joshua, now a seasoned leader, understood that this moment was as crucial as any battle fought. Each tribe awaited its inheritance, and the process needed to reflect not only fairness, but also the fulfillment of ancient promises. Joshua, together with Eleazar, the priest, and the tribal leaders, oversaw the casting of lots to determine each tribe's portion. This method ensured that the distribution was seen as coming directly from the Lord, removing any suspicion of favoritism. The process of division. The land division was a monumental task. Tribes east of the Jordan, Reuben, Gad, and half of Manasseh, had already received their inheritance east of the Jordan. With courage and determination, Caleb led his family to drive out the giants and settle the land. His story became a symbol of perseverance and faithfulness, showing that God's promises are fulfilled for those who trust and obey, regardless of age or obstacles. This ensured that justice and mercy would be foundational in the new society. The Levites also received their allotted cities, reinforcing the spiritual and communal structure of Israel. Hebron remained in Caleb's family as a legacy, a testament to his wholehearted devotion to God. Lots were then cast at Shiloh, and each tribe received its share according to God's will. Families began to cultivate fields, build homes, and celebrate the first fruits of their inheritance. The stories of Egypt, the desert, Jericho, and the day the sun stood still were shared around campfires, shaping the identity of a people chosen and led by God. Judah, Ephraim, and Manasseh. These tribes received their territories early in the process, occupying the southern and central regions of Canaan. Yet he knew that the true test would be faithfulness in times of peace. He gathered the tribes, reminded them of their covenant, and urged them to serve the Lord alone, warning against the allure of foreign gods and customs. The remaining tribes, 7 tribes, still awaited their inheritance. The journey of conquest was ending, but the journey of faith and obedience was only beginning. The Levites, set apart for priestly service, did not receive a territory, but were given specific cities and pastures scattered throughout Israel. Each boundary marked not just territory, but the faithfulness of God and the unity of a people bound by covenant. Caleb's legacy echoed among the tribes. Courage, faith, and obedience are the marks of those who inherit God's promises. At 85, Caleb's spirit was as strong as when he had spied out the land decades earlier. He reminded Joshua of the promise Moses had made, that the land he had walked on would become his inheritance because of his unwavering faith. Caleb asked for the hill country of Hebron, a region still inhabited by the formidable Anakim giants. In the midst of the distribution, Caleb, son of Jephunneh, approached Joshua. Joshua blessed Caleb and granted him Hebron, cities of refuge and justice. As the tribes settled, Joshua established cities of refuge places where those accused of unintentional crimes could find safety until a fair trial. A nation established, with the land divided and the people settled, Israel transitioned from a wandering people to a nation rooted in promise. Joshua, now advanced in years, watched as the promise made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob unfolded before his eyes. The enduring example. The division of the land was more than an administrative task. It was an act of faith and fulfillment. Israel was now a nation established, ready to live out its calling in the land God had given. Episode 8: The Last Speech and the Eternal Legacy. With the promised land fully divided and the tribes of Israel settled, a new chapter began. Peace filled the land. Families established their homes, and the routines of daily life replaced the years of wandering and conquest. Joshua, now elderly, watched with satisfaction as God's promises were fulfilled before his eyes. Here, Abraham had first received God's promise, and now Joshua called the nation together for a solemn assembly. Leaders, elders, judges, and officials gathered, knowing they were about to hear the last words of the leader who had guided them from the Jordan's crossing to the heart of Canaan. Yet, he knew his final and most important task remained: to ensure Israel's heart would remain faithful to the Lord. The gathering at Shechem. Joshua summoned all the tribes of Israel to Shechem, a place rich in history and meaning. Joshua's farewell address. Standing before the people, Joshua recounted Israel's journey, the call of Abraham, and the ancient promise, the years of slavery in Egypt, and the miracles of deliverance, the crossing of the Red Sea, the provision in the wilderness, and the victories over Jericho, Ai, and many other kings. He reminded them that every victory, every blessing, came not from their own strength, but from the Lord's mighty hand. Gratitude and humility, he insisted, must shape their future. Israel served the Lord throughout Joshua's lifetime and the days of the elders who outlived him, all of whom had witnessed the Lord's mighty works. Joshua then spoke words that would echo through generations. His life became a symbol of courage, obedience, and unwavering faith. His example inspired generations, showing that true leadership is rooted in trust in God and a commitment to justice and truth. Now, therefore, fear the Lord and serve him with all faithfulness. Throw away the gods your ancestors worshipped beyond the Euphrates River and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. He taught Israel that the real conquest was not only about possessing land, but about keeping the heart faithful to God, even as challenges changed form. Joshua left Israel and all who would come after with a choice to serve the Lord wholeheartedly. He showed that it is faithfulness, more than victories or possessions, that secures blessing and the continuation of God's promise. But if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, then choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve. But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. The renewal of the covenant. The people responded with one voice, affirming their commitment to the Lord and rejecting all other gods. Joshua reminded them of the seriousness of this pledge. To seal the covenant, he wrote their promises in the book of the law and set up a large stone as a witness, so that future generations would never forget this moment. Joshua's legacy. With his mission complete, Joshua said farewell to the people. Joshua died at the age of 110 and was buried in the land he had inherited in the hill country of Ephraim. The final reflection. Joshua's final episode is not just a story of farewell, but a lesson in legacy.